Sorry. All right, we have a quorum right now. I don't know the status of Councilman Morello, but we have three of us here, so I'm gonna go ahead and call to order this session of the Special Fiscal Committee. Here on February 27th, Hopi Stafford District 3.
10:30 at large.
Isabel Piedmont Smith, Councilmember District 1.
Christian Knapp, Deputy Mayor.
Pauline Olmstead, Deputy Clerk.
Jeff McKim, City Controller.
Lisa Laner, Council Attorney.
Wonderful, thank you all for coming here early this morning. So the agenda was distributed on Wednesday. So we need approval for that. As we discussed at our last meeting, we're kind of gonna try to have these two shorter meetings a month, one focused on council kind of budget related stuff and one focused on reports from administration. And more controller's office kind of stuff. So this is a council related stuff with the main focus of dealing with our good morning, Mr. Rollo. Dave.
I'm on only decaf, so.
Okay.
Nothing.
I haven't drank any of mine yet this morning either. Anyway, so to look at this prioritization data, both from the December meeting and what was collected from the Google Forms for some analysis and refinement, talking about the March deliberation session, honestly, and then taking public comment about that. And then just any notes about adding anything to the fiscal committee calendar, and then adjournment. And so the goal is to keep to adjourn at 9:30. So if somebody was willing to move to approve the agenda.
Move to approve.
Second.
I don't know.
This is what happens when you don't.
Gretchen's interested in running for office.
I'm not.
Maybe for the agenda.
Great, it's been moved and seconded, all in favor? Aye. Great, so, and if somebody was willing, maybe Colleen, could you time keep me a little bit and let me know when it's 9:15?
Okay.
So we can make sure to go to public comment by 9:15, to still have a few minutes for public comment and then some time for the calendar. So my thought on this data and this, analysis is kind of an overall goal of being able to, have an effective deliberation session where we talk about this with all 9 council members, because conversations like that can get kind of crazy. So I thought some of the things we could do was consider whether the suggested outcomes were actually outcomes. And if they're not, consider figuring out how we can rephrase that concept to encompass an actual outcome that meets the intent of that feedback. Group like outcomes together and how we should evaluate what bucket they might go in and how we should consider them in terms of that priority. And then, should outcomes be moved from one bucket to another? So one of the, so my example of that, for example, actually, this is an easy one. Make homelessness brief, rare, and non-repeating was under housing and homelessness and was also under,
Public safety.
public safety, and they ranked very highly, and it ranked very highly in both of them, obviously, council as a body. Wants to prioritize that, but then how do we do that? And so I highlighted a few of those things that I thought were really similar. But I took about 5 minutes and pulled out the ones that were easy. So, and I also kind of figured that since it's just 4 of us, literally any. What do people have to say about the data, and we can just have a more open-ended feedback session as opposed to types of feedback, if that makes sense. So what observations people make?
Well, just along the same lines as your example, under environment, waste reduction and creating a composting program are the same thing pretty much. So I think those should be, one is a little more specific, but you reduce waste by composting.
Yes, and so that brings up another kind of nesting of outcomes. And so my goal is to take notes on what you guys said or say. Because I don't think that we should think decisions about that in and of ourselves, but if we bring them up as ideas.
But see, then waste reduction, if you add the 2 points on composting, it brings it up to one of the top ones.
Perfect. But, and that's like the kind of discussion that I think we should have at the council level, like, this is an observation that these go together and then it increases in priority list, how do we feel that in terms of the overall prioritization? You know what I mean?
I thought that that was the type of thing we could recommend. I mean, what are we doing here?
Well, to recommend that, right, to recommend that to the full council, but to not decide, like, let's combine these things like this. Do you know what I mean? I don't think that
I understand what you're saying, but I think that we could be much more efficient.
Okay.
If we think about and present a more synthesized view of this survey. And I would argue that this is an example where we could just synthesize it. We can
Right.
still give everybody the full survey if they want to, you know, if we want to, but I mean, I guess,
I agree. I think as long as you're doing
Yeah.
it transparently and with opportunity for like objection, like you just like. It's like a different decision-making mode where you're like, hey, here's what we think made sense. Then I'll go, there's something we're missing, otherwise, let's move forward with this.
I guess the question is then, how do we want to present that at this group meeting? Because I was expecting to kind of present it more like, we thought these things went together. Councilmember, you know, Isabel, Councilmember Piedmont Smith, whichever in that meeting pointed out that combining these two things raises the priority level, to a top priority. Should we put waste reduction through composting on our, like, full letter?
I don't want to stymie this meeting, but I would say just put them together
Okay,
and say, please see details.
all right,
You know, if you want to put a narrative with it,
okay,
else we're gonna end up with 9 of us.
Yeah.
Parsing these details, which, I mean, unless you 3 think they don't go together, of course.
Right.
It's just my understanding
all
of
right.
what is waste reduction.
My goal is to figure out by the end of this meeting how I need to write the documents for the other thing. So that was my question, is like, how should I write that document to prepare for that meeting? Jeff, what do you want to add?
May I make just kind of a meta comment before you get too deep in this? You know, I'm thinking to have a really, an effective, to make this useful in the context of budgeting. We really need to kind of structure the outcomes in a way that is useful for budgeting. And so what I'm thinking is that you ought to think about each potential outcome from the perspective of these 4 criteria. One, that it is primarily a government activity or driven by government activity.
Okay, hold on.
Yeah, so I need to put that note. So one is, like, the question, is this activity driven by government?
Yeah, because there are a lot of priorities that are in that document that are great things, but are mainly driven by community action. So
Yeah,
I
okay.
think so is this a government activity or driven by government activity? Is the outcome measurable? Is the funding out? Does it have a fund?
The outcome measurable. Is the funding,
Allocation to that outcome measurable? And then this one's probably obvious, and the outcome is important to both the council and the administration. So I'm just suggesting that as kind of a lens to look at these priorities in a way that would maybe make them more useful and predictable in the context of budgeting activity.
yes,
So just to follow up on that, so is it a government activity? It doesn't necessarily include it being priority, right? Because government does a lot that facilitates community in various ways.
Right.
Social service, you know, I mean, it is part of, you know, government funding, but still, we don't do social services so much as other, you know, nonprofits do in the community, so.
Yeah, I mean, you do fund some social services, so I mean, that at least is something that is measurable, but, you know, for example, there was one that was in here, which is great, we were just talking about EVs and adoption of EVs in the community. And local government has only limited, limited bearing on that outcome. So I would say that's a more challenging one from a budgeting standpoint.
Thank you for that list.
But I also mentioned that there's redundancy in the food topic.
Yeah.
It's under environment, it's also under community health.
Global food culture has been promoted.
Community health and vitality, it appears both, so we should, I think it probably belongs more under community health and vitality.
Okay, strengthen food security. So I have all this data in like a different format too, so I'm trying to color code those. Neighborhood having access to nearby grocery stores probably falls into that too, though that didn't actually even go to all. Okay, thank you. Going back to what you said, Jeff, thank you for those things, because I mean, if one of the products that we want to create in the end, as council is a priority list specifically for 2027 expenditures. Those are really important things. I am interested in, not right now but before that meeting, understanding more about how to assess the outcome being measurable and the funding allocation for that being measurable. Because that I think is I think the funding allocation being measurable is something that like I at my seat at the table, I'm not sure that I can
Right.
assess that.
I understand.
And so figuring out a way for you to help us assess that at that meeting.
Like the suggestions, and most of my comments throughout the entire process have been that like what we're doing really probably isn't very useful to like actually make decisions. And that's not to say that it's terrible or that it doesn't have some value and maybe it's the best we can do for right now or like some iteration of it. But right, we just even all our adaptive plans, which are sort of the best thing we have, and it's the actual reflection of our shared priorities, mostly either don't have outcomes or they're very inconsistent. They're certainly not like smart outcomes in a consistent way. Even when you have smart outcomes, like let's say reduce, eliminate deaths and serious traffic fatalities by 2039, that is a smart outcome. It's, all the things in the acronym, but it's still not all that useful for 2027 budgeting because it doesn't have like interim outcomes or, metrics like that are like lead measures for how you achieve that. And so I feel like we're just like totally hamstrung with respect to actually producing something actionable and like meaningful when it comes to outcome-based budgeting until we have a relatively consistent and comprehensive tool or approach to how we actually set short, medium, long-term outcomes for major categories of governmental priority, and how we measure those things. That's one. I know that's just like a big problem and it's not like an easy fix, but I do think it's important to name. And then the second is just that something I've grappled with, and I mentioned in our last deliberation session too, is that when there's a discrete funding allocation for a thing, pocket social services fund or settlement fund or like that is easy to measure and it's very clear. But I think there are also lots of outcomes that we are trying to drive that are essentially policy that are appropriate to consider as budgetary priorities, even though the budget allocation is primarily staff time. And so noting that, so I wouldn't want to lose it by overly focusing on, can we point to the fund and the dollar amount going to this program, for instance, or this, grant. So that's another thing I just don't want to lose if we make some use of the criteria that further probably grows. But
I wonder if it might be helpful for you guys to think about, one of the things we've talked about for the new website that we're working on is different kinds of data dashboards that show, for example, other cities have places where you can see what are the current infrastructure projects, what stages are they at, that kind of thing. And so as you look at your list here and think about some of these, one of the challenges I see if I were on your side is how do you define an outcome if you don't know what the starting data already is? it's hard to say. I wish that our roads were 30% better if you don't know what are we currently spending and how far does that get us, and, you know, would that even be possible? And so you might think about, for some of these items, what would a good what would a good number be to know that would inform that, even if it's not exactly what you need right now or exactly the outcome, just what's some data that we could start to think about? And if you can't come up with a data point, that might be a good indication that the, you know, it's a broader goal like world peace, and, you know, maybe we just want, like, you know, fewer wrestling matches on in this particular room or whatever. Sorry.
Can I just make a quick comment also? I just want to respond to Councilmember Flaherty's last comment. I totally agree. Staff time is one of the biggest budgetary resources, obviously. So that, yeah, that absolutely counts. As far as resource allocations go. I think that we don't want to, really can't get into the business of kind of parsing that too thinly, like this person spends 29% of their time. But, you know, if you're thinking between 100% and 50%, you know, as allocations, that's certainly a very legitimate way to look at resources expended on a particular function.
And to understand that, the controller's already said we won't add new positions this year, so it is a zero-sum game in terms of staff time. And so if we say we want to do X and staff say, well, gee, this is how I actually spend my time, then we'll need to weigh, you know, of those things, the things we'd like to do and the things they currently do, what are the priorities?
That's good to know that there's, that is a statement of. That is a statement of clarity.
I have one other question I asked you, Chancellor, after the last meeting, that, I think would have been in the was the budget or outcome-based budgeting task force last year,
Yeah.
But I think, Deputy Mayor Knapp, you're the only one in the room who was on that. So my question, I keep bringing this feedback, but like, without kind of like a comprehensive and uniform system for like talking about outcomes and how we measure them, I feel like we're gonna struggle to take a holistic view. And my question was, it often is with city things, that like, there's thousands of other cities, some of them surely are trying to do this. I assume y'all like looked around for like best practices. I think even in the last meeting you mentioned, you know, best practices around priority-based budgeting, or something to that effect. So is there anything to share? Can you tell us more about what those conversations were like last year with respect to like approaches?
I think the big takeaway was the cities that we looked at that had done it were all much bigger cities. So step one, more resources to do it, but also they took longer. So it was a multi-year process, and I think that's the unsatisfying part to all of us, is we'd like to get somewhere faster, which is why I think it might be good for us to pick a small number of things that we're all really interested in, that we know we can track data on better, and that we have some starting data where we can say, okay, we know, you know, we've spent X on sidewalks in the last few years, and here's what got us. X on roads, X on whatever, things we already know that we're spending money on, that we care about and that residents care about, and then engineer some smart goals from those, and start there, and then we can add pieces on over time.
Thank you. I'm gonna follow up with Councilmembers Zulik and sorry as well to ask more. Yeah.
Other comments about the data or about like the process of the conversation or the kind of output that we ultimately need to develop in terms of council priorities for 2026 budget.
Well, I think, given the high ranking of developed city plans do not exist, and the kind of all over the place variety of outcomes that council members recommended for public safety, I think it's clearly need a plan for public safety. And some of the trying to get to public safety, yeah. So there was nothing to base those on, so again, we started with outcomes that were in our plans. And then, council members just added outcomes. On the basis of what, you know, of what our personal priorities are, I guess, as a public servant. So I want to highlight that we need a plan for public safety.
I would also say that some of these things are very complicated to develop and to do, and we wanna, I think my philosophy would be 10 really good data points that we all agree are important and that we want to track, or 10, 5 reports, or whatever it is. Keeping the list narrow, this is a very ambitious, gigantic list of outcomes we would never be able to accomplish.
Well, that's why we need to prioritize.
So, yeah, but I just want to reiterate that the number is often much fewer than we think that is possible. I feel like I learned that lesson in my first 6 months in City Hall. But these are all the things, we're gonna fix them all immediately, and then time taught me some important lessons about how realistic that was.
Seems so to make the best use we can out of like this data set and where we are right now. I think I think we should take the step of recommending like, here are the priority areas that we'd like to focus in based on the first deliberation session and this, you know, asynchronous data that we produced. And maybe like a goal for that meeting, and we could even come up with some suggestions, like Councilmember Johnson just shared, is sharpening these outcomes where they're not already sharp to like, what would that actually mean in 2027 and push out the budget? So whatever it is, you know, if it's to produce a public safety plan, it's like, okay, allocate some money for that and begin working on it. Maybe it doesn't need to be complete, we need to assess like what's the timeline, something like that. It's done in a community involved way. You know, and then similarly for whatever the other top 3 or 4, whatever it is, each category, then try to actually get to something more discreet where they're not already discreet about like what the implication would be for the budget. Well, we won't know everything on that front, but I think it could be a start, and especially if the administration participates in the meeting. And yeah.
Well, and that's where I kind of feel like, in terms of what council needs to hand to the administration, you know, we need to hand them something like, this is important to us. And then what I want to expect at budget time is the administration saying, this is what you told us was important, and this is the specific action that we're gonna spend money on that's gonna work toward this outcome. And so it's that idea, like, especially like the 0 traffic fatalities by 2039. It's like, I'm sure like there are lots of things already that are built in that are working toward that goal. So that goal is demonstratively important to council. And so then it's like, I mean, I would argue that should be one of those like top 10 things that we can start tracking, right? In this more definitive, like, we are working on this street transition, we are working on these curb cuts, we are working, like these are all these things that go into this, like, making things safer, the traffic timing. I mean, I hired a traffic engineer, like,
It's awesome, by the way.
and all of those things like contribute to this larger goal. And so like some of this stuff like that, it's like, I'm not like, do we need more budget allocation for that, or do we just need to bundle it and say, here are the things that we're doing to?
So just to back up a step,
Yeah,
the way you frame that, is, you know, you put together priorities, you give them to us, and we tell you what we're gonna spend on your priorities. I just wanna remind us also, those priorities need to be agreed upon, so,
oh, yes.
you know,
Yes.
you're gonna send us some, we're gonna have some. And I think the Venn diagram of how they overlap is gonna be considerable,
Yeah,
but there are likely to be some things we're interested in that are not of interest to you, and some things that you're again interested to us that. You know,
yeah.
Venn diagram.
Point well taken. I guess my main point was like, if we're doing a high level priority, I kind of want you guys to tell me programmatically, like how you can do that. Like you were talking about staff time. It's like council shouldn't dictate how, you know, this staff person spends 50% of their time on this thing. That's something that somebody else needs to dictate, and you guys just need to say like, this is how we're trying to meet this priority, like, and like not micromanaging those pieces. That was the point of my statement.
I think what will likely happen, even just in looking at your list, what I realized thinking through, because I went through thinking, where's the low hanging fruit? What are things that we can see? We do know how to measure that. That does have an immediate budget year impact. I know there's something there that is possible. Is to think of it a little bit as a multi-step or iterative process where if you have a priority that has to do with staff time, that might start an investigation on our end into, well, how much of time does that person spend on all things? If you ask me of the 800 people who work in the city, could so-and-so spend 30% of their time working on fill in the blank? That's a pretty, you gotta kind of pick apart that a little bit. So there might be some information gathering that informs some of that, priority setting where, there's a priority that feels like a priority, but then when you find out, oh, the person who would naturally do that spends 80% of their time on something else that I already think is a priority and that we're already, doing, I don't want to change that could shift things around. So we'll do some investigation and, I think that's a really good, I think the staff time question is a really good one because it's sensitive. People feel very proud of the programs they work on. Every program has someone who's deeply invested in it and saying, as we've all learned, to cut any program is very difficult. It's very hard to say we're gonna stop doing something because someone will always say, but I value that. And so having your help in getting on the same page about, here are some things that we really think are important. I think that could be a really good exercise for both of us as leaders of the city.
I just wanted to add that I think that there are things that we could agree upon and policy decisions that come with no cost whatsoever, or very little, very marginal costs. And that is things like Greg Alexander's brought this up, when sidewalks are blocked for construction, is there a sufficient notice that people can cross and sort of navigate without blocking the street? That would be something that would be no cost, but it sort of, requires people to, coordinate and, have a plan.
We passed legislation about that.
Well, and is it being done?
What is adequate, there's lots of gray areas, and then what happens if, someone steals the signs, which has been a recurring problem in the last 18 months. People steal the signs, so, there's lots of things baked into that, or how do we hold people and, partners accountable when they miss the deadlines that we need them to meet in order for us to do our work?
Yeah, well, here's an example that wasn't addressed in the middle section, and that is, well, maybe it is, but blocking sidewalks, scooters blocking sidewalks, it happens repeatedly. We have, neighborhood enforcement officers going around ticketing cars. Because they're not supposed to be parking on streets in certain neighborhoods, couldn't they just take remove the bicycle or the moped or whatever and ticket it? Find out, are we doing that sort of thing to make sure sidewalks are accessible? These things come at, I think, very marginal costs. And if we could agree on sort of a menu of these things that it would improve.
I think it's less of a cost issue than when you have X number of folks who are out ticketing, how can they be everywhere at all times? We don't know when people are gonna take the scooters, they sort of, and I will just say I'm scooter neutral, I don't ride scooters, I don't have a dog in a scooter hunt, but I do talk to people who say scooters are really important for people who don't have cars and need to get around. So when you weigh that against some of the alternative transportation stuff that people lobby for, is it more important that students don't have cars on campus and don't drive them back and forth around town, or that folks from Crestmont can get to the grocery store on a scooter, or is it more important that,
Well, I'm not
I mean,
suggesting-
and I know that it's,
I'm
you
just
can do a little
suggesting
bit.
that they don't block that side.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like the getting private property.
Yeah, I don't want to get,
No,
I don't want to get
enforcement.
confused, but I'm just saying.
No,
yeah,
those things are
it's-
not very marginal or.
Yeah.
No cost.
It's,
Those things all take more staff.
right, or, yeah, anyway, I don't wanna, we only have like 15 more minutes before going to public comment. Are there, members of the public online? Okay, wonderful. So other observations about how things go together on the actual data, other suggestions for nesting things? Because right now I have heard very few suggestions, and so if I'm kind of thinking like I'm gonna take the lion's share of the time to produce a document of kind of recommendation for how things nest. right now, that document would be like 80% what I think, and I don't feel comfortable with that.
You've got multiple zero traffic fatalities, appears like 2 or 3 times.
I got those highlighted.
I
Or
would
at
take
least I
out all
got-
the things that don't have any votes. Don't include fitting any votes, take them out, butter. everything that's-
What did council members feel about that?
I think have an appendix with like the raw data.
Yeah.
But for simplification, maybe only present the top 3 or whatever for the meeting, or if there's like 3 and 4 were very close and subject to some interpretation about whether things should be grouped, then yeah, put it down to, 4 or 5 if you need to, if it's like we need to kind of discuss how to actually determine what the top 3 are, but yeah,
Right.
drop the low of that.
How should I navigate pieces like Gretchen mentioned low hanging fruit? So what if there was something that's a low hanging fruit that got no votes?
We got no votes.
Yeah,
Left entirely, if it got a vote and it's low hanging fruit and that person sees their item,
Okay.
it's important to them, drop out, they can follow up on it individually. I'd say this is about council priorities.
Okay, so drop low hanging fruit with no votes. Keep low hanging fruit with any even.
I guess, I feel like you can still drop, put the whole data set in the appendix, so everybody can see the full thing.
Well, I'm
and, like,
just writing that down as a suggestion.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Because I mean, I haven't looked at it and
Yeah.
thought like, oh, I think that might be low hanging fruit, and that's something that like I can think that something might be low hanging fruit, and Gretchen might go, that is so not low hanging fruit.
Well,
Or
and-
the
and
opposite, so.
those could be,
Question.
some of those could be encapsulated under another priority.
Yeah.
So are there any of
Some of
those
these
that
are
you
just
see
different,
right
like-
now?
Like crime is reduced, got only a score of 4. Now, I don't want the public to say that we don't want crime to be reduced.
Where public safety is enhanced, which got 0 votes, I think everyone agrees that should be a priority.
But yeah,
It's just
that's
vague.
like, yes, it's
Right,
too
it's so
vague,
vague that
and
it's
like,
not.
what does that really mean? And so I think that that's where, like, I think that we do. I kind of agree that we need a public safety plan, but I think that it would almost be too long, like it would take too long to have a plan. It would maybe be more effective to have a conversation and agree collectively on some public safety outcomes that go toward this like overall concept of public safety being enhanced. What does that mean for it to be enhanced? What is, like, can we as council and administration and police department and fire department and, all of those like pieces of public safety, like, what does that mean? And honestly, Chief Deepak might have some ideas about some of that, because they have to collect a tremendous amount of data.
But if we're gonna do a
Around-
well plan is needed, but I mean, if you're saying
Yeah,
for
right.
the purposes of this year, can we get something slightly better here? I mean,
Yes.
a step in that would be
Yes.
what we talked about earlier is like, okay, let's take these public safety ones and in the deliberation session, try to like workshop something more discrete that we can agree on.
Yeah,
That's like, a majority can agree on.
Yeah.
Here's what we do.
and that's what I mean, it's not like never do it, but just like, that might not be something we can do in 2027, but can we move in the direction of doing better in public safety as enhanced?
Well,
I
Gretchen.
was just gonna say, from the administration standpoint, even if some of the things aren't actionable for the purpose of this exercise budgeting for next year, they're still interesting and valuable to us. So, for example, attract 24 to 44 workforce, that is an economic priority for the administration. It's very hard to unpack decades-long goals like that into budgetary things, but that goes back to the question of staff time. So when we think about like that as a priority for our economy, that might mean that there's more staff time for that long-term investment than there might be for some other short-term things that seem easy, but if you do them all, then you've eaten up all of that person's time with give this person a cookie and give this, smaller, less effective efforts. So it's all interesting to us. And I'm just sharing that in case anyone's item gets bumped off the list. That doesn't mean that it's not getting attention and isn't informative, it's just not for this purpose perhaps.
Well, yeah, and I kind of feel that way too about some of these, because I mean, people had to pick the top 3, and there are some of these categories that had a tremendous number where I'm going like, I'm having a hard time deciding between 1 and 2 here. I'm having, I would really like to rank 5 of these, but I can only rank 3, so, definitely some kind of, and that's where I think nesting can be really valuable. And drawing those pathways and relationships so that, Isabel, what were you gonna?
Oh, I was gonna say, I I talked with, the mayor last week and about public safety and the need for a plan and, I think that a good first step might be a deliberation session of council on that topic, like what do we mean by public safety? What are our top goals? How can we improve? Just getting an understanding also with the public being involved in that conversation. So I don't,
So maybe,
that could kind of get the ball rolling. And then
possibly with the
maybe,
Caps Commission too, which did produce an extensive public outreach informed report on this topic.
And as you invited housing, people who work in housing at the city to the housing one, I would strongly suggest that you invite the people who work on public safety to your deliberation session and involve them in the planning and the work. That would be informative, I think.
Definitely, and they were all involved in that Caps report too, Chief Cobb and Chief Moore.
So do you guys think in terms of a deliberation session about public safety, it would be most effective to have that deliberation session modeled more like the housing sessions with small group conversations with a population mix?
that's what I,
Gretchen,
Sorry, say that again.
in terms of that deliberation session on public safety, do you think would be most effective in terms of type of session to have? Like the housing ones last year, had the small group conversations around various topics to, as opposed to like council and guests sitting around having a conversation.
Yeah, I
to
think
have
you'll
that
get
broader.
Better, otherwise you get
Okay,
dominant voices.
right, right.
People who are quieter, a chance to speak out in small groups.
Okay, all right, other feedback around putting things together. I just grouped downtown stuff together under economic development. So there's several things that are all, you know, basically downtown is vibrant. We could probably put some of the that was under economic development, but then there's community health and vitality that I think also has some downtown stuff. And I would put the Kirkwood conversion into that downtown stuff too. Now, what do you think about that? You're the one that.
Sure,
Okay,
yeah, I can argue with it's in downtown vitality or something.
okay. So there's a lot of downtown vitality kind of stuff spread out in a couple of
Or public space oriented.
this is under economic development.
Economic development has, yes, has downtown events are frequent and well attended, downtown business environment is vibrant and sustainable. Downtown buildings and sites with blight or disrepair have been identified and remedied,
Okay,
And
only
then-
one of those got any votes.
right, and then community health. And vitality has downtown facilities, provide services and year-round programming, residential growth downtown that is inclusive of ages and abilities. Kirkwood conversion, that's all under community health and vitality, and so some of those got votes and some of them didn't, but I feel like they're all like downtown as a space. As a public space, and it could even be. I think downtown spaces could probably be nested under public spaces are high quality, engaging and active. Because downtown is one of our huge public spaces that we want to be high quality, engaging and
Can I
active.
make a suggestion?
Yeah.
As you think about that, to think about the difference between a public space like a park and a space like Kirkwood, which also has economic outcomes, there are, 100 businesses along that road, so you can make it your park, but that may not have the economic vitality, and so, as you think about what goes in community vitality, what goes in economic development, just be aware that if you put everything downtown under economic development, you're saying economic development is the goal of that project. And you might have different things that you want that are, some are economic development and some are not, but obviously, like, anything we do on Kirkwood is going to impact economic development, and we wouldn't, and vice versa, the more vibrant it is, then we hope that has a positive impact.
Right, so I think what you're saying is don't necessarily lump all things under the bucket of economic vitality. And I was trying to put them as a priority list together, and so I guess that leads me to the question of. Is it useful as council develops this priority document for us to
I don't think the categories.
list the outcomes underneath the buckets.
I don't think so.
Okay.
For me.
What
I
do
mean,
you
it does
think
illustrate
about that?
for the public, I think, how much energy is going into certain areas, but it's not ultimately. You know, it's your individual outcomes are the ones you're gonna be looking at, right, and weighing, voting on, not whole categories of. High performing government or this or that, unless it's helpful to you guys, but it's not, at this point, I don't think it'll help us much, but.
But yeah, I don't think it would help us much. It is, I think for the public, it is useful.
So wait, let me just make sure I understood what Gretchen just said, so it wouldn't be, we don't need to keep things in one bucket or another, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
It can be like. Here's an outcome we wanna see and it benefits both this and this.
Yeah.
So if we wanna like group say like vitality of downtown is really important. And have these, you know, different pieces of like, here's the ranking that it got. Like, we could group all of those things together as long as, so what you're saying, as long as we understand that like some of that is kind of subgrouped under community health and vitality. And some of it is subgrouped under economic development, so in terms of your budgeting, some of that money is gonna come from like. CFRD maybe, or public safety officers and that kind of thing, and some of it's gonna come from economic development. Is that, am I understanding? Do council members have comments about that? Okay, what else?
Under, housing and homelessness. You probably already saw this, so we have two, I'm looking at the top 5 outcomes in that category. And the second and third ones are really. Like making homelessness brief, rare, and non-repeating depends on increasing coordinated preventative wraparound services. In my view, so. If we take those together, then that is our top priority in housing and homelessness.
Okay, that brings me to the. Maybe meta comment that we don't have time for, if I want to go to public comment at 9:15, is. Is increasing coordinated preventative wraparound services for the unhoused actually an outcome? Or is the outcome homelessness is brief, rare, and non-repeating, and a method of doing that is to increase coordinated preventative wraparound services?
There's
Yes.
also like, yeah, but you know, near term, we can get to short, medium, long term outcomes. Also,
Right.
sometimes they're framed as like outcome versus impact.
Yeah.
So working on different scales, like things like 0 deaths by 2039, homelessness brief, rare, not repeating, public safety enhanced, poorly formulated as that is, like those are kind of like impact measures that are like long range and large. That's not to say that you can't have outcomes that are leading to those, even if they're programming process oriented.
Specific measure,
Okay.
you know, smart goal is different than an
Right.
sometimes.
But so part of then so part of what. I can do as a process of sorting this is to grab the things that might be programmatic elements of making homeless brief, rare, and non-repeating, like increasing coordinated services. And so I could pull some things and categorize them together underneath this making homelessness brief, repair, and non-repeating. Because there's some other things, I mean, I have those 2 highlighted because somewhere else in the document that I'm not gonna remember right this second, there's another homelessness briefer and non-repeating, and then there's another 1 or 2 mentions about wraparound services or mental health services or addiction services, like. There are a few of those pieces which also play into the unhoused struggles, so. But I will do my best to pull those things into one document, and so in closing, so that we can go to public comment. I will do my best to. I don't see my calendar in the second in front of me, to pull all these things together into a draft document. For you guys to look at with enough time. Oh, that means this weekend. I will do my best to pull all that together in a draft document this weekend so that I can get a draft out on Monday or Tuesday of next week at the latest, so that you guys can have some feedback on it or go like, hey, you forgot this one, or you forgot this one, or I think that this should be pulled over here. So that I can receive that feedback and make any changes, before a packet needs to go out for that meeting on the. Does that sound reasonable?
And you can do that with individual emails to each of us individually or by individually to you, right? So we don't have a meeting.
I will do that, yeah, yes, yes. Lisa, can I do that in one email as long as replies only go to me, so that I like BCC, and so then replies are only going to me with one email, or should I do that with 3 separate? Really, 4 separate emails. Gretchen and Jeff, I'll include you in that. But I can talk to both of you at the same time,
I'll miss our next meeting.
so.
You know, I would be consistent and send them separately.
Okay. All right,
Take your time.
It's not a
Yeah.
serial, it's not a serial meeting, and emails aren't part of serial meetings, so it's not a serial meeting issue for others.
okay, great. So does that sound good to everybody for like the next steps of what I need to do? Fantastic. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to public comment on this deliberation session on these outcomes. There are some members of the public in the room, if there are members of the public online who want to comment about this data or this plan to talk about outcomes. I see Mr. Keogh with his hand raised. I'm gonna go ahead and time it on my watch for 3 minutes, and that will just be on my watch, but thank you. Go ahead whenever you're unmuted.
Yeah, Kevin Keogh. Good morning, members of the Fiscal Committee. Thank you for your work on prioritizing outcomes for the 2027 budget and improving the budgeting process. Given your charge to track fund balances and examine fiscal trends, I'd like to raise the issue at the intersection of housing affordability, assessment mechanics, and levy policy. Indiana's Constitution requires a uniform and equal system of property assessment and taxation. Indiana Code requires assessments to reflect market value in use using objectively verifiable data, and our system relies on ratio studies to ensure there's no systematic bias across property classes. I'm not suggesting assessments be adjusted for policy reasons, but uniformity requires consistent applications of valuation methodology. If income-producing properties in one sector are adjusted downward based on income evidence or economic conditions, then income-producing properties in other sectors should be evaluated under the same analytical standards. Likewise, if trending factors or mass appraisal adjustments are producing materially higher assessed value growth in modest single-family or small-scale multifamily housing, then the underlying market data supports that becomes a ratio equity issue and a question, not a policy preference. This matters because Indiana is levy-driven. When assessed values decline in one segment and levies remain constant or grow, the burden shifts. It does not disappear. Bloomington has identified housing diversity, income inequality reduction, and enabling employees to live where they work as a priority outcomes. If assessment growth combined with levy growth is placing a disproportionate pressure on the very housing stock that functions as our missing middle and naturally occurring affordable housing, that represents both an affordability concern and a fiscal resilience risk. So I respectfully suggest 3 actions within the committee scope. Request a 5-year assessed value growth comparison by property class: commercial, large multifamily, student housing, and small-scale residential. Review the levy growth alongside general fund expenditure growth and fund balance trends. And in 2027, in that calendar year, have a public presentation explaining this redistribution efforts within our levy-driven system. My request is not for preferential treatment. It is for confirmation that the assessment methodology is being applied consistently and that the fiscal policy decisions are aligned with the council's stated housing and equity goals. Transparency and data clarity will strengthen public trust, and strengthen our budgeting process. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for sticking just about to 3 minutes. I appreciate that. Is there anybody else with their hand raised?
Yeah.
You're doing good. Wonderful. Okay, thank you to the other folks who are joining us online. So with regard to the fiscal committee calendar, I added that in at the end of our last meeting, we Jeff added in a couple of things about distribution amounts. Please make sure that I actually added those correctly. That I've written them down and then interpreted them and put the right dates in. I propose, so our next meeting is already listed for March 13th, focused on reporting from the controller and other administrative type reports. And we had talked about meeting every other week, and so the rest of those dates in there are every other week at 8:30, and then it would be alternating topics until summer recess. So how does that meeting schedule look for people's calendars?
Fine.
Yeah, no conflicts on these they were of.
Okay, clerk office.
Sure, we can put the work, not seeing anything, but I can check with W clerk, so we have doubt.
Okay, and Jeff and Gretchen. Gretchen, you mentioned you can't make the next
I
one.
can make the next one. I may miss others here and there, but in general, it's an okay slot.
And I'm the same way. It's okay in general. There may be one that I'm not going to travel for.
Right, and we can also always like swap a council topic one with a controller topic one. And I think that maybe during the spring, because it's such a heavy budgeting kind of planning time, we might need all of them, but after summer recess, it could be that there's just less work of the committee, and so not having 2 a month might be okay. I kind of like the idea of making them shorter, though. This feels like a less intense meeting right now. I don't know how other people feel about it, but it also felt less intense to prepare for, because I didn't have to have 2 different like pieces of brain thinking about 2 different things. So I appreciate that. If other people have different feelings about it, please speak up.
Yeah, we just don't wanna lose the string of like I would have to go back and review my notes from Jeff's presentation at our last meeting before we have our next meeting with,
Right.
financial reports. That's the only thing that kind of switched gears to remember what was happening.
Well, hopefully whatever packet release goes out will give us some of that. It's that memo reminder, like we were doing this thing.
Yeah.
Or we planned to do this thing, which is how I tried to do the memo this time. And if I was unsuccessful with that, let me know. Lisa,
What types of materials at this point, if any, are you contemplating for the deliberation session?
well,
And if you don't-
Probably
if you don't
this
know at this
exact-
point, that's fine, I was just curious.
probably this exact document that was in here.
Okay.
With that, with those rankings, and then probably a similar looking document that consolidates things. Yeah, so this would, I like the idea of this one being more like the appendix, to read through and having almost like a memo type document intro of categorizing things together.
Should we do whiteboards and post-it notes again, or? No, we did that part, sorry.
Yeah, we did that.
Brain is getting in gear, we did that part with survey. So now it's just gonna be more of a general discussion among us.
I think so, but so the way I submitted the request to Courtney, who is, I guess, managing this, was that I want to do a roundtable discussion with enough seats for 9 council members, Gretchen, the controller, and a public commenter. I did not assume that Mayor Thompson is gonna be there. Is that accurate?
Don't know if her schedule is
More complicated.
Yeah, I don't think that she was at most of the meetings like this last year. I think that you were at them in your role as deputy mayor, because they're like the preliminary brainstorming kind of pieces.
It's
Um,
operational.
Yeah, it's definitely operational, so that's why I figured that it would be you. Is there anybody else that anybody thinks that there should definitely be a seat included for, well, the clerk wants to sit at the table? Sometimes I feel like she does, sometimes she's like quite happy.
I believe that it'll be deputy clerk, Stoll, I think there.
Okay.
I can check with her and ask,
Okay,
double check.
okay, yeah. All right, let me know if you think there's another one. So yeah, I mean, that, like a memo style document. That I will make sure has headings and. Whatever it is that Ricky says, share how to make those documents, how to make Google documents accessible.
The staff can help you with that.
Yeah,
And maybe be clear about guiding questions.
yes.
This is how we need to move through these topics.
I will really try to get this done this weekend to be able to send it to you guys like. As soon as possible. And I may share it actually, Lisa, with you and staff at the same time as I share it with council members,
Yeah.
so that then you guys can look it over for the accessibility sorts of things, or, you know, those sorts of problems. At the same time as, committee members are looking at it for content related, concerns and things. Okay? That sound fair?
Thank you.
Sure, and then, the note that I have on here is that I think that we should probably try to calendar some of our elected official salary ordinance discussions in here somewhere. And so I don't, just in terms of our calendar, going like by this date, we wanna be able to have something accomplished around that, or we wanna have our first discussion about elected official salary ordinance, like something, does anybody have a date in mind for that? And are there any other dates that we should knowingly add to this calendar right now?
Well, in the top of your memo, you have kind of the official budget date, so we should add the date by which we have to adopt the elected officials.
I apologize, I have another meeting.
You're good. Thank you. I'll see you later. So add this as a deadline for adoption.
Which is end of year, right? End of year for elected officials.
The salary, that's right.
Yes, you cannot change it the next year.
Right, but we can do it as late as we want, because the other one is what, November 1st?
Yeah.
Okay, and so actually we should add that deadline too.
Yeah.
Because we have it on here as a, this is when we want to do it, this is when our meeting is, but like a couple years ago.
Our deadlines on the various.
Yeah,
legislation.
this year, and so other are deadlines. So that the overall budget is November 1st. And wait, is that the whole overall budget, or is that just the salaries? Cause a couple years ago,
We've separated them.
yeah, we separated them,
It could be either way. We could do the salary ordinances at the same time, or you could do them later.
but they both have a deadline of November 1st.
The elected officer's salary deadline is the end of the year.
Right,
Is that
but the
right?
other salaries
Yeah.
is November 1st,
Right.
but we can change
Do that
those the
same
next
day.
year. Okay, but the rest of the budget is like harder to change the next year?
Yes.
Okay.
Wait, so Jeff, the budget itself. The 414s and all that is due November 1st.
The final budget adoption, I gave you, I gave the dates.
We don't have to do that right now.
But I mean,
But-
it does before that, different forms that.
But there is a hard deadline
Yeah.
for final budget.
So we could add some of those in.
Yeah, so maybe Jeff, if you could come to the meeting next week with, making sure that we know those hard deadlines, and maybe putting that in a memo, especially things related to your job and responsibility with those filings.
Yeah, okay, yeah, and I know I gave them at the last, fiscal committee meeting, but I can put that. in.
You gave us the DLGF estimate stuff, but it's the
Submission deadlines.
submission deadlines, thank you.
So when you refer to the meeting next week, are you talking about the Wednesday
The,
council meeting?
the
The
deliberation session on the 11th.
Okay, all right.
Anything else for the good of the order?
I just realized that April 24th, I'll be out of town, but I can zoom.
Okay. Um. If you could just make sure to alert the clerk's office. Like, and as we approach that date, um. As a reminder about. Anything else for the good of the order?
The official Department of Local Government Finance budget calendar did just come out, so.
Okay,
The last time when I gave you the dates, that was kind of based on the previous year's guidance, so that information is up on the IGF website.
okay, maybe you could, include that in the packet for the next meeting.
Yeah, and cull it down, because it has like 100 deadlines, only some of which are applicable to you.
Pulling that down.
Thank
for-
you for calling.
Yeah, for what you think should go on here, with, you know, the long range plan of creating kind of a budget calendar that. Translates from year to year, so we don't have to every year like figure out how to make it up, we just have to. Fill in the exact dates, but we know the concept of what it is that we're looking for the data of, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and we can, at our next meeting, we can add
Yeah.
our internal deadlines for working on elected.
Okay.
Salary.
And I-
Anything else? You're good, we're adjourned.